I used to think kindness was always the right answer. That if you could share a moment without hurting anyone, you should. That inclusion was a virtue, especially when everyone involved was an adult. I learned the hard way that kindness without boundaries isn't generosity. It's erasure. And sometimes, it erases the person who has been standing right beside you the whole time. I was 34 when I gave birth to my daughter. 34 and exhausted. 18 hours of labor. An epidural that worked until it didn't. A delivery room that smelled like antiseptic and adrenaline. My husband, Daniel, was there from minute one. He held my hand through contractions. He whispered through the pushing. He cut the cord with trembling hands. He cried when they placed her on my chest. I watched him watch her. Felt a quiet certainty that we had finally made it. Past the fertility treatments. Past the miscarriage. Past the 2 years of hoping, testing, grieving, and trying again. She was real. She was breathing. She was ours. The nurses cleaned her up, wrapped her in a striped blanket, handed her to me. I traced her fingers, counted her toes, let myself believe that the hardest part was over. It wasn't. The hardest part was a text message. I sent it at 11:42 in the morning. To a man named Julian. My ex. We dated for 4 years. Broke up amicably. Stayed friends. Or so I told myself. He had been the one who held me together when my first marriage ended. He had been the one who listened when I doubted I'd ever want to try again. When I met Daniel, I introduced them. They shook hands, shared a coffee, nodded politely. I thought I had managed the transition cleanly. I thought I had kept the lines clear. I was wrong. Lines don't stay clear just because you say they are. They stay clear because you respect them. I didn't. Not that day. Daniel stepped out to grab a bottle of water and a change of scrubs. The room was quiet. Just me, the baby, the steady hum of the monitor. I looked down at her, felt a sudden, irrational urge to share the moment. Not with my parents. Not with my sister. With him. I typed it out before I could second guess. She's here. 7 pounds 2 ounces. 10 fingers. 10 toes. If you're in town, you can stop by before my family gets here. I hit send. Didn't tell Daniel. Didn't think it was necessary. He was just coming back. It would be 5 minutes. 10 at most. I told myself it was harmless. That Julian had been part of my story. That he deserved to see the next chapter. That kindness didn't require permission. I was so tired. So flooded with hormones. So convinced that love was expansive enough to hold everyone. I didn't realize that love, especially new love, requires priority. And priority means choosing who gets the first look. The first touch. The first moment. I gave that moment to a ghost. And I didn't even know I was doing it. He arrived at 12:14. He knocked lightly. I said, "Come in." He walked in wearing a dark coat. Hair damp from the rain. He smiled. Said congratulations. Said she was beautiful. I handed her to him. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. Because I thought it was the right thing to do. Because I thought Daniel would understand. Julian held her. Adjusted his grip. Looked down. His eyes filled. He whispered something I didn't catch. Took a photo. Put her back in my arms. Said he wouldn't take up space. Said he'd let me rest. Said he was happy for us. I thanked him. He left. I felt good. Light. Like I had honored a piece of my past without betraying my present. I was an idiot. Daniel walked in at 12:22. Carrying water. Carrying a fresh shirt. Carrying a smile that hadn't faded yet. He stopped in the doorway. Looked at me. Looked at the empty chair where Julian had just been. Looked at the phone still open on the tray table. His smile didn't vanish. It dissolved. Like sugar in cold water. He set the water down. Didn't speak. Didn't ask who had been there. Didn't need to. He already knew. I could see it in his shoulders. In the way his hands curled slightly at his sides. In the quiet collapse of his posture. I said his name. He didn't answer. He just turned. Walked out. Didn't slam the door. Didn't raise his voice. Just closed it softly behind him. The click echoed in the room. I told myself he was just overwhelmed. That new father's breakdown. That he needed space. That I was overthinking. I called him. It went to voicemail. I texted. Left a message. Said Julian just stopped by to say hi. Said it was harmless. Said I should have told him. Said I was sorry. No reply. I waited an hour. Then 2. Then 3. The nurse came in to check vitals. Asked if everything was okay. I said yes. Lied. The baby slept. I didn't. I watched the door. Listened for footsteps. Hoped for his voice. It didn't come. By evening, my parents arrived. Brought flowers. Brought clothes. Brought questions. I answered them. Smiled. Nodded. Played the part of the new mother. Inside, I was unraveling. Not from exhaustion. From realization. The kind that hits you when you replay a moment and see it from the other person's eyes. I saw it clearly for the first time. I had handed my newborn to another man. A man who had loved me. A man who had wanted to marry me. A man who had watched me choose someone else. And I had let him hold her first. While my husband was getting water. While my husband was the one who stayed. While my husband was the one who earned the moment. I hadn't just been kind. I had been careless. And carelessness is a form of disrespect. I didn't understand that yet. Not fully. I just felt the weight of the silence. The weight of his absence. The weight of a choice I thought was small, but had cracked something I couldn't see. I called him again. Straight to voicemail. I left a longer message. Voice shaking. Admitting I was wrong. Admitting I should have asked. Admitting I didn't think. Begging him to come back. To talk. To let me fix it. He didn't reply that night. Or the next morning. Or the next evening. I discharged the baby. Drove home. Put her in the bassinet. Sat on the edge of the bed. Stared at the wall. Waited. He didn't come. He didn't call. He just vanished. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Just completely. And in the quiet that followed, I finally understood the truth. You don't get to decide what's harmless for someone else. You don't get to gift moments that belong to a marriage. And you don't get to confuse nostalgia with loyalty. I had done all three. And I was about to pay for it. Not with anger. With absence. The loudest kind. The first night home without him wasn't loud. It was heavy. The kind of heavy that settles into the drywall and makes the floorboards feel softer. I put the baby down in the bassinet. Changed her. Fed her. Wrapped her. Did everything right on the surface. My hands moved on autopilot. My mind was stuck in the hospital doorway. The way he set the water down. The way his shoulders dropped. The way he didn't yell. Yelling I could have handled. Yelling is a reaction. Silence is a verdict. I kept waiting for the verdict to reverse. It didn't. I called him again at 2 a.m. Voicemail. Left a message. Voice trembling. Said I was sorry. Said I didn't think it through. Said I thought it was just a nice gesture. Said I'd fix it. I played the message back. Cringed. It sounded like damage control. Not accountability. There's a difference. Damage control protects the ego. Accountability faces the fracture. I didn't know the difference yet. I just knew I wanted him back. I wanted the bed to feel level. I wanted the silence to break. It didn't. Morning came with gray light and a crying baby. I got up. Made formula. Burped her. Changed her. Checked my phone. Still nothing. I called his office. Straight to reception. Asked if he'd come in. The assistant said no. Said he'd emailed HR, requested personal leave. Indefinitely. I hung up. Felt the floor tilt slightly. Indefinitely isn't a weekend. It's a boundary. And boundaries don't negotiate. I sat on the couch. Held the baby. Watched her sleep. Tried to map out how I'd gone from I'm just being inclusive to my husband hasn't slept in our bed since Tuesday. The math didn't add up until I stopped looking at my intentions and started looking at his reality. I replayed the hospital timeline. Again. And again. Daniel had been through 2 years of fertility hell with me. He'd held ice packs to my lower back during Lupron shots. He'd sat in parking lots crying after negative pregnancy tests. He'd rubbed my feet during 3rd trimester swelling. He'd memorized the contraction app. He'd packed the hospital bag. He'd signed the consent forms. He'd cut the cord. He'd been the constant. And I'd handed the first moment to a man who had left my life years ago. Not because Julian mattered more. Because I hadn't protected what mattered most. I confused courtesy with priority. I thought sharing a moment was generosity. It wasn't. It was displacement. And displacement in a marriage is a slow poison. I didn't see it then. I just felt the absence. The absence of his keys in the bowl. His shoes by the door. His voice asking if I needed anything. The house felt hollow. Not because he was gone. Because I had made it empty. My sister came over on day 3. Brought groceries. Took one look at me. Didn't ask. Just hugged me. Then she asked. I told her. She sat down. Didn't sugarcoat it. Said you gave the first moment to a ghost. While your husband was the one holding you together. That's not inclusive. That's disrespectful. I wanted to argue. Wanted to say I didn't mean it that way. But meaning doesn't erase impact. Impact is what lands. And it had landed. Hard. She stayed for 2 hours. Helped me fold tiny clothes. Left without pity. Pity doesn't fix fractures. Clarity does. She gave me clarity. It hurt. But it was clean. I stopped calling. Not because I gave up. Because I finally understood that chasing someone who's stepping back just pushes them further. I sent one email. Short. No excuses. No justifications. Just I know I broke something. I'm not asking you to come back yet. I'm asking for time to understand what I actually did. I'll wait. However long it takes. Sent it. Didn't expect a reply. Didn't need one. The silence was teaching me what my panic had been hiding. It was teaching me that marriage isn't about sharing everything. It's about protecting what's yours. And I hadn't protected it. I'd offered it up like it was public property. I hadn't meant to. But intention doesn't rebuild trust. Consistency does. And I had none left. I had to earn it back. Or accept that I'd lost it. Both paths required stillness. So I stayed still. I fell into a rhythm. Not a happy one. A functional one. Feed. Change. Sleep. Repeat. I tracked everything. Not for the baby. For myself. To prove I could hold something together. To prove I wasn't falling apart. I wasn't. I was just sitting in the wreckage of my own making. And sitting in it was the only way to learn how not to rebuild it wrong. I read articles on postpartum boundaries. On marital priority. On why nice isn't always right. I learned that kindness without loyalty is just performance. And performance doesn't sustain a marriage. Presence does. I had performed inclusion. I had sacrificed presence. The cost was the bed. The cost was the silence. The cost was the look on his face that I hadn't been able to unsee since the moment he turned away. By the end of week 2, the baby had gained weight. I had lost 5 pounds. The house was clean. The fridge was stocked. The phone was quiet. I stopped checking it. Stopped hoping for a text. Stopped rehearsing apologies in the shower. I just existed. In the quiet. In the routine. In the truth I couldn't outrun. I hadn't lost him to another woman. I'd lost him to my own blindness. And blindness, once cured, doesn't let you pretend you didn't see. I saw it now. The fracture. The cause. The weight. And I knew, with a certainty that didn't waver, that if he ever came back, it wouldn't be to the woman who handed the baby to an ex. It would be to the woman who finally understood why that mattered. I didn't know if he'd come back. I just knew I had to become someone worth returning to. Or learn to live with the space I'd carved out. Either way, the work was mine. And I was finally ready to do it. The silence stretched into a month. Not the kind that begs to be filled. The kind that demands to be understood. I stopped treating it as punishment. Started treating it as data. Data doesn't lie. It just shows you what you've been avoiding. I booked a postpartum therapist. Not because I was depressed. Because I was unmoored. Dr. Lin didn't ask about Julian. Didn't ask about the hospital. Asked about boundaries. Asked about loyalty. Asked what I thought marriage actually required when the world gets loud and the moments get fragile. I didn't have an answer. I had a habit. The habit of trying to please everyone. The habit of confusing openness with intimacy. The habit of thinking that if I just shared enough, included enough, smiled enough, nothing could break. I was wrong. Intimacy isn't built on sharing. It's built on guarding. And I hadn't guarded anything. I'd left the door open and called it generosity. Dr. Lin didn't judge. She mapped. She showed me the difference between inclusive and indiscriminate. Inclusive means you choose who gets access. Indiscriminate means you let access choose you. I had been indiscriminate. And in a marriage, indiscriminate is just another word for careless. Carelessness isn't malicious, but it is corrosive. It eats away at the quiet places where trust lives. I stopped calling him. Not out of pride. Out of respect. Respect for the space he'd taken. Respect for the fact that chasing someone who's stepping back only proves you still don't understand why they stepped back in the first place. I focused on the baby. On the routine. On the tiny hands that didn't care about my mistakes. They only cared about consistency. So I built it. Feeding times. Sleep windows. Tummy time. Pediatrician visits. I logged everything. Not for perfection. For proof. Proof that I could hold something steady. Proof that I wasn't running from the weight of what I'd done. Proof that I was learning to carry it. The house stayed quiet. My parents stopped asking when he'd be back. My friends stopped offering unsolicited advice. I stopped needing it. Advice is cheap. Accountability is expensive. And I was finally paying the price. I joined a new mothers group. Not for friendship. For perspective. I listened to women talk about postpartum isolation. About husbands who checked out. About marriages that cracked under the weight of unspoken expectations. I didn't share my story. I just absorbed it. Learned that fracture isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a single moment. A misplaced priority. A boundary crossed in the name of kindness. I saw myself in their pauses. In their hesitant confessions. In the way they looked down when they said I didn't mean to hurt him. Meaning doesn't matter when impact lands. I learned that the hard way. I started writing. Not a journal. A ledger. Of choices. Of moments. Of where I'd prioritized politeness over partnership. I didn't write to wallow. I wrote to recalibrate. I listed every time I'd let someone else's comfort override my husband's presence. Every time I'd called compromise loyalty. Every time I'd confused access with intimacy. The list was long. Longer than I wanted to admit. But honesty doesn't shrink to fit your ego. It expands to match your reality. I faced it. Not with shame. With responsibility. Responsibility is the only currency that rebuilds trust. I didn't know if he'd ever come back. I didn't need to know. I needed to become someone who wouldn't make the same mistake again. Someone who understood that marriage isn't a public forum. It's a private sanctuary. And sanctuaries require gates. I started building mine. Not to shut people out. To keep what mattered in. I changed the locks. Not on the doors. On my habits. I stopped texting my ex, stopped responding to casual check-ins. Stopped treating my past like it still had voting rights in my present. I archived the photos. Muted the notifications. Closed the tabs. Digital boundaries are just emotional boundaries translated into code. I coded mine. Carefully. Deliberately. Without apology. I didn't do it to punish anyone. I did it to protect something I'd almost lost. Something I hadn't realized was fragile until it cracked. Fragility isn't weakness. It's honesty. And honesty is the only ground that doesn't shift under your feet. I stood on it. Even when it hurt. Even when the silence stretched. Even when the baby cried and I had no one to hand her to but myself. I held her. Fed her. Rocked her. Learned that solitude isn't abandonment. It's instruction. It teaches you what you're actually made of. I was made of more than panic. More than performance. More than the desperate need to be liked. I was made of quiet. Of routine. Of the slow, unglamorous work of becoming someone who finally understood that love isn't about sharing everything. It's about protecting what's yours. And I was learning how to protect it. Not with walls. With standards. Standards don't negotiate. They hold. I held them. Every day. In every choice. In every quiet morning where I woke up and knew, without doubt, that I had to earn back the life I'd almost handed away. I didn't know if he'd return. I just knew I wouldn't hand the keys to anyone else again. Not to an ex. Not to a friend. not to a moment. The keys belonged to the marriage. And the marriage belonged to the man who stayed through the labor. The man who cut the cord. The man who deserved the first look. I had forgotten that. I wouldn't forget it again. The ledger was open. The work had begun. And for the first time since the hospital door clicked shut, I wasn't running from the silence. I was listening to it. And it was teaching me how to rebuild. The 6th week arrived without a calendar reminder. It arrived through a shift in the light. The heavy, suffocating quiet had thinned. Not because he returned. Because I stopped treating his absence as a verdict and started treating it as a mirror. I stopped pacing the hallway. Stopped rehearsing apologies in the shower. Stopped measuring my worth by whether he answered a text. I focused on the work. The real work. Not the performative kind I had posted about in quiet moments. The kind that happens when no one is watching. I reorganized the nursery. Not for aesthetics. For function. I labeled bins. Sorted clothes by size. Created a feeding log that tracked patterns, not just amounts. I bought a white noise machine. Adjusted the thermostat. Fixed the leaky faucet he had been meaning to replace. I did it not to prove I could hold it together. To prove I did not need him to hold me together. There is a difference. One is dependency. The other is competence. I chose competence. Competence does not beg. It builds. And I was building. Slowly. Deliberately. Without an audience. The baby started sleeping through the night. Not perfectly. But consistently. I learned to trust the rhythm. I stopped waking up at every rustle. I let her cry for 3 minutes before responding. I learned the difference between distress and adjustment. I adjusted too. I stopped checking my phone at 2 in the morning. I stopped refreshing email. I stopped wondering if he was with someone else. Speculation is a tax on peace. I stopped paying it. I replaced it with routine. Morning walk. Afternoon feed. Evening stretch. Night log. I tracked my own patterns too. Sleep quality. Mood shifts. Stress triggers. I noticed I cried less. Not because I was numb. Because I was processing. Processing does not require tears. It requires attention. I paid attention. To the way my shoulders dropped when the house was quiet. To the way my breathing slowed when the baby slept. To the way my hands stopped shaking when I held her. I was healing. Not in a straight line. In a spiral. Each loop brought me back to the same wound, but from a different angle. And each time I saw it clearer. I had not lost him to another woman. I had lost him to my own inability to prioritize what I claimed to value. I said marriage was sacred. Then I treated it like a shared lounge. I said he was my person. Then I handed the first moment to a ghost. I said boundaries were important. Then I left the door wide open and called it kindness. I did not need to convince him I was sorry. I needed to convince myself I was different. And different is not declared. It is demonstrated. Demonstration arrived on a Tuesday. Not with a letter. With a decision. I had been invited to a baby shower by a colleague. A casual thing. Potluck. Gifts. Small talk. I RSVP'd yes out of habit. Then I looked at the guest list. Saw Julian's name. His sister was married to the host's cousin. Of course he would be there. I stared at the screen. Felt the old pull. The old need to be inclusive. The old belief that avoiding him would make me petty. I did not feel petty. I felt clear. Clear enough to know that showing up to a room where my ex would be holding the baby I had almost handed to him was not kind. It was careless. Again. I clicked decline. Did not overthink it. Did not write a long explanation. Just closed the app. Then I did something else. I drafted a new contact policy. Not for him. For me. A simple rule. No casual contact with past romantic partners. No shared moments that dilute primary loyalty. No blurred lines disguised as generosity. I printed it. Taped it to the fridge. Not as punishment. As architecture. Architecture does not argue. It supports. I needed support. Not from him. From myself. I realized I had spent years outsourcing my boundaries to other people's comfort. I let my ex's feelings dictate my access. I let my friends' opinions dictate my choices. I let the fear of looking selfish dictate my marriage. I stopped. I drew the line. Not in anger. In clarity. And clarity, once established, does not need validation. It just needs maintenance. I maintained it. Every day. In every small refusal. In every quiet choice to protect the sanctuary I had almost burned down. The package arrived on a Thursday. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a single item. A framed ultrasound photo. The one from week 20. The one we had looked at together in the dim clinic room. The one where he had pressed his hand to the glass and whispered, "You are really in there." I had not realized he had kept a copy. I had not realized he had brought it back. I held it. Felt the weight of it. Not nostalgia. Recognition. He had not thrown it away. He had not burned it. He had stored it. And now he had returned it. Not with a note. Not with a demand. Just the image. Proof that he remembered what we had built. Proof that he had not forgotten the labor. The waiting. The hope. Proof that the fracture was not total. It was just deep. Deep enough to require surgery, not a bandage. I did not call him. I did not text. I placed the frame on the nursery shelf. Next to the baby's first hat. Next to the feeding log. Next to the ledger I had been writing in. I did not treat it as an invitation. I treated it as a milestone. Milestones do not require celebration. They require acknowledgement. I acknowledged it. Then I kept working. I knew what it meant. He was not ready to come back. But he was not ready to walk away forever either. He was watching. Waiting to see if the silence was producing change or just regret. There is a difference. Regret looks backward. Change looks forward. I was looking forward. I adjusted the routine. Added co-parenting prep. Researched shared custody frameworks. Drafted a parenting plan that assumed he might return. Not because I expected it. Because I was preparing for responsibility, not romance. Responsibility does not require hope. It requires structure. I built it. Carefully. Honestly. Without pressure. The house stayed quiet. The baby grew. The work continued. And for the first time, I was not waiting for him to fix us. I was fixing myself. And that, I finally understood, was the only thing that ever actually works. I started attending a co-parenting workshop. Not because I thought we would split. Because I refused to be unprepared if we did. The instructor was a family mediator. She did not talk about love. She talked about logistics. Communication protocols. Decision trees. Conflict de-escalation. Boundaries in shared spaces. I took notes. Not emotionally. Operationally. I learned that healthy separation is not about cutting ties. It is about clarifying them. And clarity requires documentation. I drafted a co-parenting agreement. Not for court. For myself. It outlined feeding schedules. Medical decision authority. Holiday rotation. Emergency contacts. Communication windows. I did not write it to push him away. I wrote it to prove I could handle the weight of consequence without collapsing. Consequence is not punishment. It is reality. And reality does not negotiate. It requires adaptation. I adapted. I stopped seeing his absence as abandonment. I started seeing it as calibration. Calibration means the system is adjusting to new data. The data was my mistake. The adjustment was my accountability. I did not rush the process. I trusted it. I let the baby sleep. I let the house breathe. I let the silence do its work. And slowly, the heavy quiet turned into steady space. Space does not demand. It holds. And I was finally strong enough to stand in it. I did not know when he would return. I did not need to. I knew what I would do when he did. Not beg. Not perform. Not promise. I would show up. Calm. Clear. Changed. And that was enough. For now. For me. For the life I was rebuilding. Brick by brick. Day by day. Quietly. Consistently. Unapologetically. The ledger was closing. The foundation was settling. I was ready for whatever came next. Not with fear. With readiness. And readiness is the quietest form of hope. The 4th month brought a different kind of quiet. Not the heavy, suffocating kind that lived in my chest after the hospital door clicked shut. The steady kind. The kind that comes when you stop fighting the current and start learning how to float. The baby was rolling over now, smiling at ceiling fans, sleeping 4-hour stretches. I tracked it all, not out of anxiety, out of appreciation. I had spent so much of my early motherhood bracing for collapse that I almost missed the fact that we were surviving. More than surviving. We were adapting. I went back to therapy. Dr. Lin did not ask if he had called. She asked if I had stopped checking. I had. Not because I did not care. Because I finally understood that checking is just a delayed form of control. And control is the opposite of trust. I was learning to trust myself. Trust that I could wake up at 3 a.m. and not panic. Trust that I could handle a pediatrician appointment alone. Trust that I could sit in a quiet house and not feel abandoned. Abandonment implies you were left with nothing. I was left with a baby, with a roof, with a routine, with the slow, unglamorous work of becoming someone who no longer needed permission to take up space. I stopped attending social gatherings where I knew Julian or his circle would be. Not out of bitterness. Out of calibration. Calibration means you adjust your input to match your desired output. My desired output was peace. My input was boundaries. I maintained them. I stopped explaining them. Explanations are just apologies in disguise. I did not owe anyone an apology for protecting my marriage. I owed my husband the truth that I was no longer the woman who handed him a ghost. I owed myself the truth that I would never do it again. The framed ultrasound had sat on the nursery shelf for weeks. I did not move it. I did not frame it differently. I just let it exist. Proof that memory is not the same as presence. Memory looks backward. Presence shows up. I was not waiting for him to show up. I was preparing for the possibility that he might. And preparation requires honesty. Honesty about what broke. About what needs to change. About what I will no longer tolerate. I drafted a letter. Not to send. To write. I wrote it by hand. Longhand. On lined paper. I detailed the fracture. Not to assign blame. To assign responsibility. I took mine. Fully. Without flinching. I wrote about the hospital. About the misplaced priority. About the difference between kindness and carelessness. I wrote about the months of silence. About the work I had done in it. About the boundaries I had built. About the co-parenting plan. About the fact that I no longer needed him to validate my worth. I did not seal it. I did not mail it. I just wrote it. And in writing it, I finally stopped rehearsing conversations in my head. The letter was the conversation. With myself. And that was enough. The baby started babbling. Not words. Sounds. Syllables. I recorded them. Not for him. For her. For the record of who we were becoming. I stopped measuring progress by his absence. I started measuring it by my presence. Presence does not require an audience. It requires attention. I gave it. To the feeding schedule. To the laundry piles. To the quiet evenings where I sat on the floor and let her crawl over my legs. I did not feel lonely. I felt grounded. Grounding is what happens when you stop trying to hold someone else up and finally let yourself stand. I stood. Not perfectly. But steadily. Steadiness is the quietest form of strength. It does not announce itself. It accumulates. Like muscle. Like trust. Like the slow realization that I had survived the worst part of my own making. And survival is not a destination. It is a baseline. I built mine. Brick by brick. Day by day. Without fanfare. Without expectation. Just work. And work, when done correctly, becomes peace. I received a text on a Tuesday evening. Not from him. From his sister. Short. Neutral. He asked me to tell you he is okay. He is working. He is not ready to talk yet. But he sees the changes. I read it. Did not reply. Did not forward it. Just acknowledged it. Acknowledgement is not agreement. It is recognition. I recognized it for what it was. Not a bridge. Not a demand. Just a data point. Data does not require emotion. It requires adjustment. I adjusted. I closed the phone. Picked up the baby. Fed her. Changed her. Put her down. Continued the routine. The routine did not break. It held. And in that holding, I finally understood the difference between waiting and living. Waiting is passive. Living is active. I was living. Fully. Deliberately. Without apology. I stopped measuring my days by his return. I started measuring them by my consistency. Consistency does not beg for validation. It builds it. I built it. In the quiet mornings. In the structured afternoons. In the evenings where I read parenting books instead of scrolling through old photos. I learned that healing is not about erasing the mistake. It is about outgrowing the pattern that caused it. My pattern was people-pleasing. My pattern was confusing access with intimacy. My pattern was believing that if I just shared enough, nothing could break. I outgrew it. Not through a dramatic realization. Through daily practice. Practice does not require inspiration. It requires repetition. I repeated the boundaries. I repeated the routine. I repeated the truth that my marriage was not a public space. It was a private sanctuary. And sanctuaries require gates. I kept mine locked. Not to keep people out. To keep what mattered in. The 5th month arrived. The baby sat up unassisted. Grabbed her feet. Laughed when I blew on her stomach. I recorded the laugh. Did not send it. Did not share it. Just kept it. Proof that joy does not require an audience. Proof that life moves forward whether you are ready or not. I was ready. Not for him. For myself. I started attending a postpartum support group for mothers navigating separation. I did not speak at first. I just listened. Heard women talk about the guilt of prioritizing themselves. Heard them talk about the fear that they had ruined everything. Heard them talk about the slow, unglamorous work of rebuilding trust with their own judgment. I recognized every word. I finally spoke in week 3. Did not offer advice. Just shared facts. I shared the timeline. I shared the fracture. I shared the silence. I shared the work. The group leader did not offer solutions. She offered validation. Validation is not the same as absolution. Absolution erases responsibility. Validation acknowledges it. I needed acknowledgement, not forgiveness. I got it. And in getting it, I finally stopped carrying the weight of his absence as proof of my failure. I started carrying it as proof of my accountability. Accountability is heavy, but it is clean. And clean weight is the only kind that strengthens the spine. I stood straighter. Not in defiance. In alignment. Alignment means your actions match your values. My values had shifted. From inclusion to protection. From performance to presence. From pleasing to prioritizing. I lived by them. Every day. In every quiet choice. In every refusal to blur the lines again. I did not know if he would ever walk back through the door. I did not need to. I knew what I would do if he did. Not beg. Not perform. Not promise. I would show up. Calm. Clear. Changed. And that was enough. For now. For me. For the life I was rebuilding. The ledger was closed. The foundation was set. The routine was steady. I was ready for whatever came next. Not with fear. With readiness. And readiness is the quietest form of hope. The 6th month didn't arrive with a milestone. It arrived with a request. Not a text. Not a call. An email. From a licensed family mediator. Standard format. Proposed a supervised meeting. Neutral location. 45 minutes. Focus. Parenting plan, communication protocols, next steps. No expectations. No pressure. Just a conversation. I read it 3 times. Felt my pulse steady. Not because it was what I wanted. Because it was what was necessary. Necessity doesn't require excitement. It requires preparation. I prepared. Not with outfits or rehearsed lines. With documentation. I printed the pediatrician summaries. The feeding logs. The vaccination schedule. The co-parenting draft I had written months ago. The boundary policy. The therapy notes. I didn't bring them to prove I had changed. I brought them to prove I was serious. Serious doesn't need validation. It needs clarity. I replied within 24 hours. Accepted. Proposed a date. Confirmed location. Closed the inbox. Didn't overthink it. Didn't tell my friends. Didn't ask my sister for advice. This wasn't a social event. It was a structural meeting. And structural meetings require emotional insulation. I insulated mine. The coffee shop was quiet. Mid-morning. Soft lighting. Low hum of espresso machines. I arrived 10 minutes early. Ordered black coffee. Sat in a corner booth. Back to the wall. Facing the door. Not out of paranoia. Out of protocol. Protocol reduces variables. Variables increase anxiety. He arrived at exactly the agreed time. Wearing a dark jacket. Hair shorter. Shoulders relaxed. Not tense. Not guarded. Just present. He sat down. Didn't hug. Didn't touch my hand. Just looked at me. Really looked. Not at the woman who handed the baby to an ex. At the woman who had been sitting in the quiet for 6 months. He said thank you for coming. I said thank you for reaching out. We didn't fill the silence with small talk. We opened the folders. I handed him the pediatrician summaries, the sleep logs, the vaccination schedule. He reviewed them. Nodded. Asked about reflux patterns. I answered. Factually. Calmly. Without defensiveness. He asked about the co-parenting draft. I explained it. Not as a demand. As a framework. He read it. Paused. Said it was thorough. Said it showed preparation. I said it showed responsibility. He agreed. We talked for 38 minutes. Not about us. About her. About schedules. About decision-making. About communication windows. About how to handle holidays. About what happens if one of us is unavailable. About emergency protocols. It was dry. It was functional. It was exactly what it needed to be. When we finished, he closed the folder. Looked at me. Said he had been watching from a distance. Said he saw the routine. Said he saw the boundaries. Said he saw that I wasn't just waiting for him to come back. I was building a life that didn't require him to survive. I said that was the point. He nodded. Said he wasn't ready to move back in. Said he needed more time. Said he didn't know if we could rebuild what broke. I said I didn't know either. Said I wasn't asking him to commit to reconciliation. I was asking him to commit to clarity. He said he could do that. We stood up. Didn't hug. Didn't shake hands. Just nodded. He left first. I stayed. Finished my coffee. Packed the folder. Walked to my car. Drove home. Didn't cry. Didn't celebrate. Just breathed. The meeting hadn't fixed us. It hadn't promised anything. But it had proven something. Proof that the work was visible. Proof that accountability doesn't require performance. Proof that structure outlasts emotion. I placed the folder on the kitchen table. Next to the baby's feeding log. Next to the ledger. Next to the ultrasound frame. They were no longer relics of regret. They were markers of progress. Progress isn't linear. It's iterative. And iteration requires consistency. I had it. 2 days later, Julian texted. Casual. Heard you're meeting with Daniel. Hope it goes well. I stared at the screen. Felt the old pull. The old habit of responding politely. The old belief that silence is rude. I deleted the message. Didn't block him. Didn't reply. Just removed the thread. Then I opened my boundary policy. Read the first line. No casual contact with past romantic partners. No shared moments that dilute primary loyalty. No blurred lines disguised as generosity. I had written it for myself. I was living it. Not out of spite. Out of self-respect. Self-respect doesn't negotiate. It holds. I held it. I told no one about the meeting. Not my sister. Not my therapist. Not the support group. Some transitions don't require an audience. They require integrity. I maintained mine. I focused on the baby. On her crawling. On her first solid foods. On the way she reached for my face when I sang. I didn't romanticize it. I just attended to it. Attendance is the quietest form of love. And love, when built on truth, doesn't fracture under pressure. It adapts. I adapted. I stopped checking the calendar for his return. Stopped measuring my days by his presence. Started measuring them by my consistency. Consistency compounds. I let it. The house stayed quiet. The routine held. The work continued. I didn't know if we would reconcile. I didn't need to. I knew what I would do if he came back. Not beg, not perform, not promise. I would show up. Calm, clear, changed. And that was enough. For now. For me. For the life I was rebuilding. The ledger was closed. The foundation was set. The routine was steady. I was ready for whatever came next. Not with fear. With readiness. And readiness is the quietest form of hope. The 7th month didn't bring a declaration. It brought a test. Tests don't announce themselves with fanfare. They arrive on ordinary days, disguised as ordinary problems. The baby spiked a fever. 103. Lethargic. Refusing the bottle. I didn't panic. I checked the pediatrician guidelines. Administered acetaminophen. Monitored her breathing. Logged the temperature every 2 hours. I called the after-hours line. Followed the nurse's instructions. Stayed calm. Not because I wasn't scared. Because panic doesn't lower fevers. Presence does. I sat on the nursery floor. Rocked her. Tracked the clock. Waited. At 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Daniel. Not a text. A call. I answered. He didn't ask how I was doing. He asked what the pediatrician said. I told him. Factually. Calmly. He didn't offer to come over. He didn't ask if I needed help. He just said keep logging it. I'll check in tomorrow. I said okay. The call ended. I didn't feel disappointed. I felt aligned. Alignment means the system works. And the system was working. He was checking in. Not as a husband. As a father. As a partner in logistics. That was enough. Progress isn't measured in grand returns. It's measured in reliable check-ins. I kept logging. The fever broke by morning. She slept. I slept. The routine held. He showed up 2 days later. Not at the door. At the mailbox. Left a package. Inside was a new digital thermometer. A box of pediatric electrolyte solution. A note. For next time. Keep the logs. I placed the items in the nursery cabinet. Didn't overanalyze the gesture. Gestures are just data points. The data said he was paying attention. That he remembered the protocol. That he was participating, not performing. I didn't invite him in. Didn't ask him to stay. I thanked him via text. Short. Clear. Received. Acknowledged. Continued the day. The baby played. I folded laundry. The house breathed. I realized then that trust isn't rebuilt through reunions. It's rebuilt through repetition. Repetition of respect. Repetition of boundaries. Repetition of showing up without demanding a role. He was showing up. I was holding the line. The line wasn't a wall. It was a filter. And filters let the right things through. I stopped asking when he'd move back in. The question had lost its urgency. Urgency is a symptom of insecurity. I was no longer insecure. I was prepared. Prepared for him to return. Prepared for him to stay away. Prepared for whatever the next phase required. Preparation removes the need for control. Control is just fear wearing a suit. I took the suit off. I focused on the work. The therapy session shifted. Dr. Lin didn't talk about reconciliation. She talked about integration. How to merge a rebuilt self with a fractured partnership. How to ensure old patterns don't resurface under stress. How to maintain boundaries without building resentment. I took notes. Applied them. Practiced them. In small moments. When a friend asked if we were getting back together. When a neighbor assumed I was single. When the silence stretched longer than usual. I answered consistently. We're navigating co-parenting. We're taking it slow. We're prioritizing stability. Consistency isn't flashy. But it's reliable. And reliability is the foundation of everything that lasts. The 8th month brought a shift. Not in him. In me. I stopped measuring his absence as a deficit. Started measuring it as space. Space to breathe. Space to grow. Space to prove that my worth wasn't tied to his presence. I joined a weekend parenting workshop. Not for him. For me. Learned about emotional regulation in toddlers. About secure attachment. About how parental consistency shapes a child's nervous system. I applied it to myself. I regulated my own triggers. I stopped jumping at every notification. Stopped reading into every delay. Stopped treating his pace as a reflection of my value. His pace was his process. My pace was mine. They didn't need to match. They just needed to be honest. Honesty became the new metric. I tracked it. In my words. In my actions. In the quiet moments where I chose truth over comfort. Truth is uncomfortable, but it's clean. And clean spaces heal faster. He started attending pediatric appointments. Not everyone. Just the major ones. The 6-month checkup. The vaccination update. The developmental screening. He sat in the corner. Took notes. Asked the doctor questions. Didn't look at me unless necessary. Didn't force conversation. Just participated. I appreciated it. Not as a husband. As a co-parent. Co-parenting isn't about romance. It's about responsibility. And responsibility, when shared correctly, rebuilds trust faster than apologies ever could. I stopped waiting for him to say he loved me. Started noticing when he showed it. In the way he brought the right formula. In the way he remembered her sleep schedule. In the way he respected the boundary without testing it. Showing is quieter than saying. But it's louder in the long run. I learned to listen to the quiet. The 9th month arrived. The baby was walking. Pulling up on furniture. Babbling full syllables. Laughing at shadows. I recorded it. Didn't send it. Didn't share it. Just kept it. Proof that life moves forward. Proof that joy doesn't require an audience. Proof that I was no longer waiting for permission to be happy. Happiness isn't a gift from someone else. It's a practice. And practice requires discipline. I disciplined my mind. Stopped rehearsing conversations. Stopped imagining scenarios. Stopped treating his silence as a verdict. I treated it as a timeline. Timelines require patience. I had it. I used it. I focused on the present. On the feeding. On the walking. On the quiet evenings where I sat on the floor and watched her explore. I didn't feel lonely. I felt complete. Completeness isn't the absence of someone else. It's the presence of yourself. And I was finally present. Fully. Deliberately. Without apology. I didn't know if he would come back. I didn't need to. I knew what I would do if he did. Not beg. Not perform. Not promise. I would show up. Calm. Clear. Changed. And that was enough. For now. For me. For the life I was rebuilding. The ledger was closed. The foundation was set. The routine was steady. I was ready for whatever came next. Not with fear. With readiness. And readiness is the quietest form of hope. The 10th month didn't arrive with a declaration. It arrived with a key. Not a dramatic return. Not a speech. Just a spare key on the kitchen counter. Left there on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at the grocery store. I knew he'd been in the house. The air felt different. Not heavy. Just occupied. I placed the key in the ceramic bowl by the door. Didn't text him. Didn't call. Just let it sit. Keys don't promise. They just indicate access. And access, when earned, doesn't need an announcement. It just needs to be used carefully. He started coming by more regularly. Not to move back in. To co-parent. To share the load. To show up without demanding a title. We fell into a rhythm. Not the old one. A new one. Built on protocols, not assumptions. We communicated through a shared calendar. Discussed decisions in writing. Kept conversations focused on the baby, the household, the boundaries we'd both agreed to hold. I didn't test him. He didn't test me. We just worked. And work, when done consistently, becomes trust. I stopped waiting for him to say he loved me. Started noticing when he proved it. In the way he respected the closed bedroom door. In the way he asked before entering. In the way he never assumed his place was guaranteed. Guarantees aren't given. They're maintained. He was maintaining it. I was too. One evening, after the baby was asleep, we sat at the kitchen table. No agenda. No mediation. Just two people who had survived the same fracture. He didn't apologize. I didn't forgive. We just acknowledged. He said he stayed away to see if I would change without him. I said I changed because I had to, not because he left. He nodded. Said he saw the difference. Said he wasn't coming back to the woman who handed the moment to a ghost. He was coming back to the woman who finally understood why it mattered. I said I understood. Not because he returned. Because I had done the work. The work doesn't depend on the audience. It depends on the standard. I kept mine. He respected it. That was the foundation. Not romance. Respect. We didn't move in together that night. We didn't sign anything. We just agreed to a structured trial period. Documented. Reviewed monthly. Focused on logistics, communication windows, and boundary enforcement. Not because we doubted each other. Because we valued the architecture. Architecture survives emotion. I learned that the hard way. I kept the boundary policy on the fridge. He read it. Didn't flinch. Just nodded. Said he'd honor it. I believed him. Not because he promised. Because he'd already proven it. Through absence. Through patience. Through showing up without demanding a role. Roles aren't claimed. They're earned. He was earning it. I was letting him. Slowly. Carefully. Without surrender. The baby started sleeping through the night in her own room. The house felt different. Not perfect. Balanced. Balance isn't a destination. It's a practice. I practiced it daily. In the quiet mornings. In the structured evenings. In the way I no longer confused kindness with carelessness. I learned that true inclusion isn't about letting everyone in. It's about choosing who stays. And I chose the man who stayed through the labor. The man who cut the cord. The man who deserved the first look. I had forgotten that. I wouldn't forget it again. The ledger was closed. The foundation was set. The routine was steady. I was no longer waiting for permission to be whole. I was already whole. And wholeness doesn't require an audience. It requires maintenance. I maintained it. Every day. In every choice. In every quiet moment where I chose priority over performance. That is the lesson. That is the line. That is the legacy. I will keep building. Quietly. Honestly. For me. For her. For the marriage I finally learned how to protect.